Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask.
All right, we're back. It's Bill and Dan. And Bill watched, what was it? I forget what it was called. It's
So
Unexplained?
it's History Channel series The Unexplained with William Shatner, season 4, episode 10, which is The Missing Link. And they talk about all of our relatives.
This
And
is,
the show's done kind of in two parts. And I think we're going to talk about the first part, which deals a little bit more with evidence they've found of different fossil species and things like that. And then they get into some of the more unexplained type stuff in the second half of the episode. But there's a lot to
well, I
talk
want
about.
to, yeah, let's talk about the science on this. I mean, that's something that's been, I've been trying to piece this sort of idea together for a while, and have you gone so far as to try and put together a little timeline to
Hmm.
figure out what we're talking about here. And once you sort of stop and realize, now that we've lengthened the quote unquote lifespan of Homo sapien now, officially we found a bone or jawbone 300,000 years ago. That's where we're at now. We're at
Yeah,
300,000.
the goalpost moved back like 100,000 years very
Well,
recently.
I feel like it was only 60 or 70,000 years ago in the 50s. I mean,
So
we've
let's
pushed
talk
it back
about
a
that.
couple times.
I am a child of the 80s. I went to school in the 80s, um, elementary school, and then all through the 90s and all of that. And when I started school, Neanderthal was a caveman, a primitive form of ancestor that was a direct line from us, and there was something in between. They always talked about the missing link and then
It
the
was
other
it
missing
was
links.
it was Ugg caveman.
Yeah, it was ugh, cavemen smash. No culture. Even though we're now finding out some of these discoveries were happening while we were in school being taught this stuff. Um, the idea of Neanderthal, and I don't think you've been to the Smithsonian yet. Have you? Have you been to the Natural History Museum in DC? I can't remember
I
if you've
went in
visited
I
yet.
went in high school.
Okay,
Middle
so
school. I went in middle school.
yeah, I went when I was in grad school, and what fascinated me walking around that museum, it's fascinating, but almost every exhibit that has anything to do with the history of man has a sign up and it says everything here is wrong. And they just don't have the funding right now to, because they would have to effectively redo the entire museum for anything that has to do with dinosaurs and like the whole Homo sapien history thing, because it's all wrong. It's all that 50s, 60s style caveman with a club. And that was the image of Neanderthal when I was a kid. Shoot, we even had, what was it, Encino Man with Brendan Fraser,
Hmm.
who was the frozen caveman, and then there was another movie that came out in the 80s that was, I think it was like The Iceman or something like that, and they thawed him out, and again, super primitive type thing.
Now,
Uh,
now let's be fair. Encino Man, probably the most accurate one, because
he's a
you
person.
could just shave him and turn him into a normal guy. Like that's
Yes, you
just
could. You could.
that wasn't wrong.
But the other one, I'll have to figure out what it was. The Iceman one, where they kind of put him in this special biodome and thawed him out. It was a very different thing. And then there's the movie The Quest for Fire that had Ron Perlman in it, where they played Neanderthal and played them up as these very, very almost more ape than man. Right? That was the image I grew up with. Right? That's what I
Yes.
was taught. Um, and I mean, really, it's almost like it was prophetic that we had those amazing trilogy of movies come out with the Lord of the Rings and show us this whole world of humans standing alongside near humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, hobbits, and then just a few years later, all of this information explodes. Is what it felt like. That
Yeah. So
those
we've
movies
got
almost opened the floodgates to archaeology and this new idea around what our ancestors are.
I would say more like the books probably gave that. I mean, because that's been the
But the books have
last.
been around since the 30s.
But they've been talking about some of these things for a long time. I mean,
Yeah,
at least some of these
I'm
they've
just saying,
found.
coincidentally, it feels like
Yes.
those came out, and then in '03 they found the Hobbit, the Homo floresiensis, right? So not much later, they actually found that little smaller than 4 foot species. And I remember us talking about it when it first came out because there was a lot of speculation that, oh, this must be a mutant, or this must have been a diseased person, or there was something wrong. And when they finally got all the DNA back, and they talk about this in the show, there's no genetic abnormality. It's a different species. It's not a pygmy person, right? Or a dwarf person. It's a completely separate subspecies. And then the thing that really hit me out of this whole episode that deals with all this stuff is that island has always been an island, even when the sea levels were lower. It has never been connected to a continental landmass, the island of
Hmm.
Florence in Indonesia, which means up until this point, it's been understood that only modern humans traveled on the water. So, how did they get there? And so, our whole concept of sea navigation may be blown out of the water, that other species may have traveled. There has to be a way. Now, granted, we only have evidence in one cave for Homo floresiensis, but somehow they traversed several hundred miles of ocean to get to that island, and we don't know how. There's just not enough evidence right now.
Just because we've only found one cave worth of evidence doesn't mean we need to dismiss it though, because we've only got one cave of evidence for the Denisovans as well.
Yeah, and even less there because we have
Yes,
like part of a jawbone and a couple of
and
teeth.
and I think a finger. I feel like
Maybe
there's a
part of a
finger
skull.
bone
There's
in
not
there
much.
somewhere.
There's
Not
nowhere
a lot.
near as much of the skeleton. But from that, we found okay, now giants walked the earth, and not the giant ape, the Gigantopithecus, that some people like to talk about. Because the Denisovans, they're saying, are 7 to 8 feet tall
Based on the skull and the
based on the teeth.
bones. Yeah,
And specifically the teeth in the jawbone, because the teeth are almost double the size of a modern human's tooth, which is huge because we have giants today. We have Andre the Giant. We have the Big Show, the professional wrestler. There's another professional wrestler, Omos, who's over 7 foot tall.
the
But their
mountain.
jaws and their teeth, the guy who played the Mountain in Game of Thrones, you're right.
Mhm.
But their skulls aren't double the size of ours,
Right.
which, there's a huge amount of muscle mass and stuff that comes along with that. Um, so this is a fascinating topic for me. I've loved it. I really got hooked back into it. I don't remember if you remember the show Walking with Cavemen when BBC did that
I
series in the early aughts.
I just picked up found it at a thrift shop. I just picked up one of those, like the book, the companion book to that.
That's cool.
I'll have to. I need to read through it. But on the same thing, if you really take the 300,000 year point that we're at back.
Yeah.
Let's see. Sorry, my audio is bad. I'll fix this on the back end here. I was too loud, I think. Okay, there we go.
We're still learning.
So we've got, if you take a look at the 300,000 year for Homo sapiens, let's not even get into the fact that
That's
it could
the
be.
mark. That's our
it-
goalpost right
there,
now.
there are studies that push it potentially back to 900 to a million years if you look at teeth and all sorts of things like that. But put that aside. Let's just sit with the number of
We know
300,000 because
300,000.
we found
we have
physical.
bones. We have
got it.
bones.
That means we coexisted with the Denisovans, who were around, up to before, well, 500,000 years ago. Neanderthals,
Actually,
Homo floresiensis,
The evidence
Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, and Homo. It's naledi, but that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 6 other hominid species that we shared the planet with. And if you take it back even farther, there's a couple more.
Well, I was going to say, and they said in the episode, and I haven't verified this, that we have bones now for 21 different hominid species that are somehow, in some way, shape, or form, related to Homo sapien. Not in a
Absolutely.
linear form, and that's the other thing they talked about. We used to think this was a straight line, but now we think of it more like a growing bramble bush where stuff is all over the place. um, but at least 21 species.
And
And
you
let's say, half those we probably shared the planet with at some point at the same time.
Right. And I think you sent me an article earlier, I found it, that mentions the idea that just 7% of our DNA is unique to modern humans.
Yes.
Which means that we're not that much different than Neanderthals. And honestly, 7% is quite a bit, but we share a lot of we share 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees and pigs. So like, and pigs don't look anything like us. So obviously 7% is more, but that doesn't really mean anything. If they, I don't know.
Well, let's
It's
take it a
interesting.
step further. Many species, non-human species, can breed together. A horse and a donkey can make a mule, right?
Right.
Most of those are sterile. Very few mules can breed true. And we have found, and they talked about this in the episode, and I've done this. 23andMe has released the let's see how much Neanderthal you have in you.
Hmm.
And we know we are not a unique species. We are a hybrid. We are a hybrid
Yes.
species. I am a hybrid. I have significantly more DNA from Neanderthal in me than like your wife did,
Right.
right? When I did the test, it said I have more Neanderthal DNA than
Like
like
98% or
95,
something.
95% of everyone else they've tested so
Yeah.
far, with 13 unique characteristics coming from both of my parents. Now, both of my parents didn't have all 13, but I pulled from both of my parents. So that was really interesting to me to find out it's like I am Neanderthal, at least a little bit. I'm a little bit of a caveman, and you haven't done that one yet, have you?
I have not done that one. I did mine through Ancestry because when I did my DNA, I was actually doing um
Genealogy?
thank you. Genealogical research. I was trying to figure out my family tree. It was something my grandmother had started. I could do a whole episode on that stuff.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But that's sort of so I need to do that one. I haven't done it yet. But I
And
also
I
don't.
think you also did yours really early. Like when you did your DNA test,
Mhm.
this Neanderthal thing wasn't a thing.
No, it wouldn't
Yeah.
have been a thing. No, and the only reason we did Leslie's was because she's adopted, so she was curious
Mhm.
about her that she wanted to do all the medical stuff that's on 23andMe, which is amazing. The fact that we can look at your DNA and go like, well, you should be getting this test and this test and this test just to make sure, you're not going to, you're susceptible to these things. It's
Yeah,
just
I just
amazing.
pulled mine up. It says I have greater than 2% Neanderthal DNA. I have 293 variants in my DNA that trace back to Neanderthal. Now that's out of over 7,462 variants that they have tested.
That's a lot.
So, yeah, but almost 300 variants. And little things like I didn't realize the hitchhiker's thumb, where your thumb curves back, that's a Neanderthal trait. So I've got it. And
Oh, well then I've got it.
you've got it, yeah. Well, you and I are also both, European descent, so we have
Hmm.
a significantly higher chance of having it in our genetic line. Um, but yeah, I mean, and this is just a little neat tidbit from the 23andMe. It says in 2010, scientists sequenced the Neanderthal genome for the first time, leading to the discovery that most people can trace up to 2% of their DNA to Neanderthals who lived throughout Western Eurasia from Wales to southern Siberia and near the Atli Mountains. So that's just kind of cool. Um,
And we've found now that there's evidence of the Neanderthals doing more than we give them credit for. I
a
want to
lot more.
say, I think I may have saved it. I want to say that we found evidence of them cooking, and I'm
Oh
trying
yeah, no,
to.
there's evidence of cooking with Neanderthal. There's evidence of um, art. We've now
Hmm.
identified
There it
distinctive
was.
cave art to Neanderthal.
We
They
found we
bury their
found
dead.
we found some specific. I can I'll drop the article in the notes here, but we actually found evidence of at 90,000 years ago, specifically of Neanderthals cooking crabs. They actually found
Mm-hmm.
evidence
I
of
remember
theirs.
when you
There
sent me
was
that
a
article.
fire, and they were basically cooking and eating them right there, but they were not far from the water, and so it was very clear they had gone and caught them and brought them in, and then made a fire and cooked them and eaten them. And
And to cook shellfish is an important thing because raw shellfish is not safe by and large,
right,
right? But we have evidence that they lived in tribal groups or small family clannish groups, and that they buried their dead. And I'm gonna pull my my religious studies hat here. The concept of burying your dead with stuff leads to the idea of the concept of an afterlife, which is foundational to the idea of faith and religion. Now, I'm not saying that they were Catholic, right? But there are the underpinnings of what we need to know about a culture that we were studying today, if they were a hunter gatherer culture, to say they have some kind of faith based superstition, which is really what a religion is.
there's a organizational piece to that, like that, regardless of want to call it religion or whatever, they have created some sort of tradition that they are
Yes,
partaking in that moment, and that's significant of something.
which is important because in some of the studies, and this comes from like Walking with Cavemen, which is an older show and maybe somewhat outdated, but they talked about earlier hominids that they think mourned their dead but didn't bury them and didn't leave anything with them. So the concept of loss is there, but the concept of something after wasn't yet. And we know with Neanderthal that they had a concept of
Mhm.
something after.
Right.
Um, and it was really striking. I loved how they, because there's a scene in this episode of The Unexplained where they have like a wax museum figure of a Neanderthal, and he's in a three-piece suit. And they said,
Right.
if you were to dress up a Neanderthal today and teach them our language, which they should be able to learn, you probably couldn't tell they were a Neanderthal if they shaved,
Right.
which is just mind blowing from what I grew up with.
Well, I mean, and we can keep going back with this. I'm looking at my little timeline that I've been putting together. We go 400,000 years ago. We've got evidence of Homo sapiens 400,000 years ago, not bones, but evidence. You go back 780,000 years ago. We've got evidence of humans cooking fish. At
Yes,
780, early humans may not have been humans, may have been some other
maybe not
hominid, but
Homo sapien, but some hominid.
something was cooking fish. You go back 1.2 million years ago, they found 600 obsidian hand axes
Hmm.
in Ethiopia. Keep going. So let's say we go back to 2.6 million years ago. We've got early hominids using stone tools. It's crazy. Is this
And
keeps going back?
so this is fascinating. Again, this is from the 23andMe website. It's called Finding Common Ground in the Neanderthal section. It says studying the Neanderthal genomes revealed we share a common ancestor who lived over 550,000 years ago. The common ancestor, and they throw in a possibly here, possibly Homo heidelbergensis, gave rise to at least three lineages: humans in Africa, Neanderthals in Europe and West Asia, and Denisovians. I'm probably not saying that right. Denisovians in Asia. So
Denisovans.
Denisovans, yeah. I
It's a
that one I
it's
just
taken me
trip over
forever
one.
to get that one. Well, and so
Um,
the problem with that though is that Homo heidelbergensis, while they call that one out, actually is probably not where that comes from. I think it's probably earlier than that, just based on the numbers that I mean. And I granted I could be off a little bit on what I've pulled out here, but like I've got 600 to 200,000 year time frame for those. Definitely they could be older, but I think we're older than that. So I think they're
and like they said, they threw out a possibly, right?
right.
And then what's really interesting is we had a common ancestor, we split off, and then we came back together.
Right.
And this evidence keeps getting pushed because I remember Originally, like, we maybe met them right before they went extinct. That was what I first heard, like at 50,000 years ago. And now they're saying around 60,000 years ago, a group of humans left Africa and interbred with the Neanderthal. We know that now genetically. So we've pushed that number back even further. Um, and they said if we were to, this is fascinating. This again from the 23andMe website. If we were to add up all of the Neanderthal DNA present in the entire human population today, we could piece together 40% of the pure Neanderthal genome. That's amazing.
That's a lot.
That's a
Well,
lot.
and so let's actually take a second and talk about DNA though, because which 40% and like because if
It
you
doesn't say,
really
it's a blurb, but yeah.
no, I know, but I'm sort of talking hypothetically though, because I have been reading a couple books on DNA, and most of our genetic code, a significant portion, somewhere over 90% of our genetic code, is actually considered junk. It doesn't actually. It's apparently there's a lot of repetition. Like there was, I remember
Yeah.
again. I don't remember which book it was, but it was something like it was a 250 character, GABCD, the code of the DNA, and it's like a 250 character. Maybe it was even longer than that. But then it repeats just 1,000 times or something like that, and that there's a lot of what we've decided is garbage in there. So putting together 40% of the Neanderthal genome might be enough to bring them back if we really even
If we
wanted to. I
really
mean, we're going to
wanted
bring
to.
back the woolly mammoth, so why not?
And that's a whole nother episode. You know, uh, what is it? De-extinctioning
Yeah,
creatures,
it's
which
fascinating.
I find fascinating. And some of them I kind of lean toward. Some of them I'm not so sure. I mean, just to
I
throw it
think
out
we
there,
need to
the
bring back the
Tasmanian
saber-tooth.
tiger.
We need to bring back the
We made the
saber-tooth tiger.
Tasmanian tiger extinct, right? If it is,
Yeah.
because there's some evidence there may be a small population still out there. But we did that through overhunting. So I have no problem with bringing that back. The dodo, some of those kind of things, right? Now, do we
I
need to
feel
go
like
full
I
on Jurassic Park? I don't know. That's another
I
one.
feel like I just saw something somewhere that was saying we actually had less to do with the dodo than we thought we
It
did.
went
But I
extinct
may
during modern human history. Let me just put it that
yeah.
way. Like we,
I think we're more I think more of what the idea was is they were saying that we've sort of taken that on as our fault, and it's like we may
maybe it
not have
wasn't.
actually done that. Like
Yeah.
like
Uh,
did we help? Probably not, but I don't think it was like we killed them all.
yeah, it may be something like the bobwhite quail in Texas. And for people who don't know, that's a bird that's native to Texas. And when I was a kid, they were everywhere. You could go out and whistle Bob White, with that sound, the Bob White sound, and they would reply. But they nest on the ground, and everyone has said that they're basically gone due to overhunting. And we found out it's actually the introduction of the fire ant into North
Oh, that
America
would do it.
that has devastated the pheasant and the bobwhite quail population because their eggs are on the ground and the fire ants eat the eggs and the babies, and that has devastated them more than anything else. Fire ants are
I've
evil
always
and
hated
should be
fire ants.
destroyed. They're not native to the U.S. and we should find a way to exterminate them.
I don't
But
think
that's a
that can
separate thing.
happen.
I don't think so either.
There's some
Uh,
I that's another one of those like I remember hearing something about like ant biomass is actually larger than human biomass.
Biomass. Well, what's real interesting
Yeah.
on a side note to the fire ants, they seem to be moving north, and they had stopped because of the cold line, but now they seem to be hibernating, and so that almost seems as if they're adapting to move further north.
Oh, that's
And
good.
so the northern states may have to deal with fire ants soon, and you can deal with those horrible things. Fire ants are bad.
Fire
Um,
ants are terrible.
but this
Okay.
history of humanity is just, I mean, I've always been fascinated, and now it's like at some point in history we were living in a Dungeons and Dragons world with dwarves and elves and hobbits, and they may
And
not have
I'm
all
gonna
interacted at the same time, but the potential was there.
just say it cuz I'm crazy. I think dragons were real. I think
Yeah.
that
We know the
I mean cuz
Komodo was there.
we know that the the Yucatan asteroid that killed off the dinosaurs, they have sort of changed the statement to killed all of the non-avian dinosaurs because we know that like the
Have they? I
chickens,
haven't
the
seen that.
birds. Yeah, I've been hearing that recently where they're starting to be like it killed the non-avian dinosaurs,
You
which
know,
is
there is the legend of the Thunderbird, and there have
right.
been pterodactyl type sightings throughout North America, throughout modern history, up into like the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
And
They're
so,
probably gone now.
well, we say that, but we don't know.
Pro-
I mean, and
Probably.
here's the reason I'm going to throw this out there. They just identified a species of whale native to the Gulf of Mexico that is distinct and unique and is a large filter feeding whale.
Hmm.
This year, we're not talking
We
something
also
small.
don't explore the ocean very well. I mean,
No, but
that's a whole
it breaches and they've seen it and they just assumed it was something else and it's not. It's a separate species.
wow.
Okay, so you're
Well,
talking a 25-ton ocean going animal that has been seen
right.
by people for hundreds of years. And they're like, no, it's this other thing. Well, no, it's actually not. We keep
But what
finding
I
new
was
stuff.
saying, dragons are real. No,
Okay,
it's it. Well, but I come at
give
this
me your evidence.
from
Dragons are real.
I have no evidence, but the only
Okay.
evidence that I have is we know that 1% of animal species get fossilized, and we've
Yes.
found maybe 1%, 1 to 2% of that because we don't really look for that stuff. I mean, there are people who go out and go to places to hunt dinosaur bones and things like that, but most of the stuff we find is like, hey, we were digging a road and those are some
We
bones,
found
so
something.
someone needs to come
Yeah.
figure out what these are.
And
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 so,
they also tend to be what's interesting about that, they tend to come in areas where fossilization was
possible.
probable and possible. And there's one we're going to look at some point later in Waco where they have found a statistically massive number of mammoths. It's a national monument, Mammoth National Park in Waco, Texas. It's an area that it's been a kind of a creek river type area and has been prone to flooding for millennia. And they've found them in what have looked like flash floods that killed multiple mammoths and buried them. And so they keep finding them layer on top of layer, and they found more than one what they call a breeding herd of mammoths. Well, you don't just find that everywhere. It
Right.
just happens to be right there. But you're right. I mean, and how many fossils have been found, dug up? They thought it was something else, destroyed, lost. How much stuff sitting in the Smithsonian somewhere from that scene from the Indiana Jones where everything's just boxed up and they haven't gone through it all, or the
So
British Museum, or I mean,
So I
there's so
told
much
you
stuff.
about the Boneyard, Alaska guy who was on Rogan 6 months
Yes,
ago. Okay.
yes,
He went on Rogan and said, he's pulling all those mammoth skulls out of that big thing. But he said that they, in the 30s, had a bunch of stuff had been sent up to there and it had been dumped in the bay. Do you remember him talking
yeah,
about this? I'm gonna create a bone rush or whatever. Someone pulled something out of the bay.
yes.
Someone
They pulled a couple
found
of things out of the bay.
a cat. I think they found a cat jaw, and I only saw that there had been one thing. So
So people hunting for those also just happened to pull out a giant cache of firearms that had been illegally smuggled into the country in the same
that's fun.
area. And yeah,
Nice.
so they're finding stuff in the bay now that has been dumped in the bay. But the Smithsonian admitted they dumped all those bones. They just dumped the bones in the water because they didn't have anywhere to store them. So let's
We
just
ran out of
toss them in the
room.
water. I mean, my
It's what they
God, how
did
many
with all the
private
North
collectors would
American
be
giant
interested?
bones.
Yeah. Oh, that's another one I want to talk about is the giants because we now have DNA and fossil evidence that a giant hominid existed.
Right.
So, oh my God, all of a sudden, is that pure speculation? Was their range bigger than we thought it was? Were there land bridges earlier where people came across? There's
Are
because it was
we
Asia. They were Siberia, Asia. So who's to say that at some point in the past that land bridge didn't open and they moved over into the North America? Because here's the
Or do
problem with
we
North
have?
America. Here's the problem with North America when it comes to this. And I understand where it comes from, and I respect where it comes from. But any ancient bones found in North America are considered tribal Native American bones, and they cannot excavate them because of the laws to protect the Native American burial grounds, which were put in place after we committed genocide against the Native Americans. So this type of study of ancient hominid can't happen in North America. And I don't know how to balance that with the culture and respect that goes with Native Americans. I don't know the answer to that question because I have some Native American ancestry and I don't want them digging up my ancestors, but at the same time, there's a layer at which are you really Native American? Because we're seeing this site in Florence, right up the road, different Florence, Florence, Texas, which has the oldest tools that they found, which are thousands and thousands of years older than they thought. I mean, it's what? I think it's 16,000 years. I'd have to go look up the date. Um, but that's something we want to talk about later on. Is this dig site in Texas that has pushed the history of stone tool making in the Americas back significantly, like pre-Clovis.
Well, Clovis. Don't even say Clovis. Clovis is
Well,
something that they
Clovis is a
made
type
up.
of point. Clovis is a type of point that they associate with a particular culture when you get into flint knapping. That's how I refer
Right,
to
and they
Clovis
there
when
was
I'm
sort of
referring to
this
Clovis.
Clovis culture and thing that was put
Yes,
together that's been abandoned. So the Florence site is dating between 16 and 21,000 years.
for
So that
the
is
for human occupation and tool use.
yes, yeah. They found blades, projectile points, engraving tools, and scrapers that date between 16.7 and 21.7. So
Yeah.
that's significantly older than. I mean, that is
Considering
pre.
we grew up being told that humans didn't cross until the last ice age and may have come into the Americas around 10,000 years ago.
And the
That
funny
was
thing is they may have showed up 10,000 years ago, which is right after the utter and complete devastation of North America.
absolutely. And no one
So,
says that another wave didn't come through. But we
right,
grew up being taught
that was it.
no hominid reached America or the Americas before 10,000 years ago.
That
Period.
wasn't right.
It was a virgin territory, right? And we now know for a fact that is not true. We have this evidence in Florence, Texas. We have the footprints that they found not long ago in the Southwest that there's a lot of argument about the dating around.
And the mammoth bones in California,
Hmm. That they were
which
pretty
are
sure had been used,
super
had
old.
tools used on. Those came out of a highway dig, if I'm remembering correctly. They were doing like highway construction and found them. Um, so the history of our species is just absolutely fascinating and way more complicated than we ever thought it was. And what fascinates me is even though these discoveries have been happening, there's still this resistance to update the textbooks and educate people and make this mainstream and really get it out there and break down these concepts of just Neanderthal was a dumb caveman who couldn't do anything more than pick up a stick.
Right.
This is
And
wrong. Just plain wrong. We know it's wrong. So, how do we get people to start talking about this diversity, and where did they go, and what's next? That's my question. Like, we look back at all this, but what's coming? How do we get to the next thing? Where does the next thing come from? Like,
we're
to
building it
my,
right now on the computers.
oh, don't even start. But I mean, think about that concept though. We talk about the concept of evolution and all this stuff, and have we seen a new species evolve?
No, not that we
I
know
mean,
of, at least.
not that we know of. I mean, maybe we haven't, we just didn't realize it. But We know a lot of hominids came from stuff. So where's the next one coming? Or are we it? Are we the end of the line? That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Are we the end of the line, or is there going to be some aberration, change, or mutation that's going to lead to something else?
It's possible that we could be the end of the line because we're the last ones. There isn't any more potential for that significant interbreeding that was happening.
Hmm.
Maybe it happened. Like maybe we had 5 6 groups that were left, and this is what it is. That's why we see a little bit of everything in our DNA,
Yeah,
because this is the end.
yeah, we're
This
the
is
last one because
the
we're not
final form.
we're not Homo sapien separate. We are Homo sapien hybrid of other things.
Right.
Yeah. But that just concept to me, it's like what does it take to trigger a new whatever? You know,
It's a full
that's fascinating
paradigm
to me.
break. It's a
Yeah.
full paradigm break, and that's a whole nother discussion. Um,
I mean, I love the idea of what they did with the second Black Panther, where something happened and they evolved to breathe water,
yes,
and be stronger and handle pressure and of all of that, and it made them super strong. So maybe what's the next trigger? Is it all the plastics like we were talking about the other day? Is it all the plastics? Is it all the foodstuffs? Is it going to be a change in the radiation coming through our ionosphere? What is it going to take? Because I mean, let's just take melanin, skin color, right? At different points in the planet, we developed different levels of color of skin to protect from UV radiation, right?
right.
At least that's the theory as I understand it for why we have the variation in pigmentation that we have. Um, and where does that, I don't know. This whole concept just, I love where we've come from, but lately I've been thinking, well, where do we go? What's next?
And
Uh,
one argument of that is that we are the breeding ground of AI. That this is where
yeah,
the larval form of AI before we become some sort of cyberpunk.
that's
Um,
one thing. Another one that's interesting, and I don't know if you've read The Expanse or watched The Expanse, but in that book series, which is fascinating, if anyone's looking for a great book series, The Expanse series is great. Humans colonize Mars and the outer planet asteroid belts. And over several, it doesn't say how many, but several hundred years, multiple generations, the Martians begin to grow slightly different, and the people in the belt grow different because of the low gravity environments. The belters are tall, elongated, thinner. Um, they have bigger heads, longer heads because they live in microgravity, so they develop a different skeletal structure. Martians also have a less pronounced change in their skeletal structure and bone mass and all of that. And then the humans are people from Earth. And they're all human, but people from Earth. And what's funny is in the book they call them squats because they're smaller, shorter, denser, stronger.
mm,
And depending on how long your family's been in the asteroid belt, how long you've been exposed to microgravity, and a whole bunch of other stuff like what drugs you got when you were pregnant with the kid or whatever. Um, some people have the potential to reacclimate to a gravity well. Some people don't, which leads into other stuff in the book. But that almost leaning toward three separate subspecies of Homo sapiens in that book based on gravity and microgravity and the environment you grew up in. So maybe that's the next step because that's leading out into the solar system, which that's what I'm hoping is we get off planet so we don't get wiped out by an asteroid strike. I'm hoping we expand out. I want Star Trek. I want the Federation. I want us to be across a galaxy spanning species. Hopefully, we'll do a better job as we move out. But that concept fascinates me, and it's driven by what all we've had before.
mhm.
And I know you've been there. not this spring break, but last spring break, I took the boys and we went to the Houston Museum of Natural Science, which is an amazing museum. And we spent hours on the fossil floor because they have an entire floor that's the fossil floor. I think your buddy got married there.
Hmm.
Um, and in one section there just deals with the hominids. And they have
Right.
all these skulls and pieces of skulls and just like this monster board of all of these images where they've drawn what they are and what they think they were and what they think they look like. And it's just fascinating.
It is. I mean, it's spectacularly fascinating.
And then there's all the stuff that we didn't even touch on with this episode. And again, we're talking, this started with I watched The Unexplained with William Shatner, the Missing Link episode, because what if these things didn't go extinct? Or what if they evolved into something else? And that's the back half of the episode. And I think we can talk about that one next time.
Absolutely. No, this is just. I mean, I think the
Because
one
it's a
thing
show
that
itself.
I
I mean, it's an
right,
episode itself, right? To talk about
right.
all of that.
The one thing I can say for certain though is that I don't think we have any idea what actually happened. I think we are
No,
all of us, even the scientists, we're all just wildly speculating on the little bits and pieces of knowledge that we have and trying to piece it together, and I
absolutely.
don't think we're going to figure it out.
Because I hope we figure more of it out.
We
But
will, but not all
just
of it.
just the idea that think about in 2003 they found a handful of bones from a couple of skeletons in one cave on an island in Indonesia and blew up our entire understanding of what was going on. That's all it took.
Right.
And it completely blew it up.
And
The
then all of a
Neanderthal
sudden we
one,
went all of a sudden at that point we had to go like, well, maybe these bones were something that we didn't think they were. Maybe this is something different. And then all of a
yeah.
sudden it sort of we started to break it apart.
And as we've dated things, and now we're getting like better images of cave art out of Europe, right? A lot of those sites are protected, and they're doing a lot of studies on that. And we're finding, oh, no, 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 this stuff is much older than we thought it was. We just assumed it was all Homo sapien. And okay, now it's
Hmm.
Neanderthal, and we're finding more Neanderthal stuff. And um, one of the things I want to talk about later on is like some of the stuff that's coming out of the permafrost out of Russia and
Hmm.
Siberia, and all the stuff that we're finding there, and some of the permafrost in Alaska, and we're finding so much stuff. And like you said, it's 1% of the stuff fossilizes, and we've maybe found 1% of that. So
Right.
what don't we know? There's so much we don't know.
Absolutely. Well, there's a cave art of all the handprints. Have you seen that one of all
Yes,
the
yes,
handprints? You
that's
know,
the
there's
one
a
they
six
think
fingered hand
is.
on there.
Yeah, I've seen stuff that
Yeah,
talks about at least
there's
one.
a six. I've seen pictures of it. Like you can find them online. There's a six
Mhm.
fingered hand on that wall.
And we don't know how they made
Uh,
it. You
yeah,
know,
I mean
it could
maybe
have been a six-fingered hand. It could have been an artist interpretation where they like laid it over again and made a sixth finger. I mean, we know the concept of like how they do that. Like you put the handprint up and you spray the paint on it, or you put the paint on your hand and you put it on.
yeah,
We know
they were
there's
like that.
we've the what do they call it? There's this idea of trying to figure out how people did things. It's like practical archaeo no historical archaeology or recreative archaeology. I'm blanking on the term. People who flint knap, people who are trying to redo primitive skills, and they're trying to relearn this stuff through experimental archaeology. I think that may be it.
It's
Um,
experimental archaeology. Yeah.
experimental archaeology. And so we don't know that we're doing it right, but we're trying it, and we're trying it in a lot of places, right? Not just primitive stone tools and primitive painting. There's a whole experimental archaeology school on how did the Romans do the things that they did with like Roman weapons and things and Greek weapons and stuff.
They just
Um,
figured out Roman concrete.
I saw that. I haven't read the article, but you sent it to
It's
me.
quicklime and seawater, and it creates an exothermic reaction when they do that, and so it ends up leaving like giant clumps of lime in there in the
Okay.
concrete. It doesn't fully mix. And so when it cracks, the water gets in the crack and it reactivates that chemical interaction and it fixes itself.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy. Who
I
knew?
mean, let's be honest. The Romans built roads 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and they're in better shape than our highways are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a good place to call it. Let's
Yeah,
stop it there. We'll see you guys next time.
it's been
Have a good
fun.
one.
We will talk about weird stuff. See you next time.